Israel and the US continue to bomb Iran, but Israeli opinion polls suggest support for the war is dropping, while Iranian missiles still force millions into shelters there. So what does Israel now seek from attacking Iran, and what could end its onslaught? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. Expectations that US President Donald Trump might say something new about ending the war against Iran fell as flat as stock markets in response to his address to the nation on Wednesday night. The watching world was served up a rehash of what's been heard before, apart from a new threat to bomb Iran into the Stone Age. As the Jewish Passover holiday begins, his partner in war, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has largely been quiet this week. In a recorded message on Tuesday, he said that Iran no longer posed an existential threat to Israel. But yet the bombing goes on. As well as military targets, civilian buildings and facilities are being destroyed across the country, among them universities, factories and medical infrastructure, such as the century-old Pasteur Institute of Iran. So what's Israel's aim now, and what might end its attacks? And is there any disagreement with the US? We'll talk to our panel of guests who join us in just a moment. But first, this report from Narges Mobalegi.
After nearly 5 weeks of a war with changing objectives and moving goalposts, there was anticipation that US President Donald Trump's address to the nation on Wednesday night would announce something new, or possibly even herald the end of the war. It didn't. Trump instead threatened Iran with yet more attacks.
We are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We are going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong. In the meantime, discussions are ongoing.
But there was still no clear detail on how he intends to end the war, or how Israel will do so either. Speaking on Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seemed to soften his earlier rhetoric, now suggesting Iran is no longer an existential threat.
We broke the power of Iran's terrorist armies that surrounded us in a noose. It is true, they still have residual capability to threaten us, but they can no longer threaten our existence. Before the operations, we fought Iran alone. Today, we fight shoulder to shoulder with the United States.
The impact of Iran's attacks on Israel is intensifying. Daily alerts force millions to take shelter, with missiles causing more damage and more injuries. And that appears to be affecting public opinion. 1 month in, opinion polls suggest that those who say the war should continue until so-called regime change in Iran is down from 63% to around 45%, while those who want a ceasefire has risen from 16 to 30%. Netanyahu's forces are active on several fronts as well as Iran. Invading Lebanon again is tying up 4 military divisions in the south. Attacks in Gaza continue, with large forces there, as well as in the occupied West Bank, where there is widespread violence by settlers backed by the Israeli army. Israel's chief of staff has warned of a potential military collapse because of severe personnel shortages. Meanwhile, after Trump's speech, Iran promised to continue fighting.
In continuation of the heavy and severe blows you have received so far, expect even stronger and await our more crushing and more destructive actions.
The US-Israeli war against Iran last year ended when President Donald Trump ordered Netanyahu to turn his planes around. But it's not clear how Israel will end its involvement in the war this time. Narges Mobalegi for Inside Story, Al Jazeera.
Time to speak to our guests who are joining us on today's Inside Story. In London, Daniel Levy, president of the US Middle East Project and a former Israeli negotiator at the time of the Oslo Accords. In Washington, D.C., we're joined by Gordon Gray, Professor of Gulf and Arabian Peninsula Affairs at Georgetown University and a former US ambassador. In London, Yossi Mekelberg, he's a senior consulting fellow at Chatham House. Thank you, all three of you, for coming back on Inside Story. Daniel, let me start with you. Trump's address, the world was watching. Did he say anything new, I wonder? Many are saying he didn't. 32 days into the war, what he did say is that he wanted to provide an update on the, quote, tremendous progress our warriors have made in Iran. Tremendous progress. Do you think that's how they're seeing it in Israel?
Well, thankfully, I was sleeping during the speech, but I have caught up on it. It was the usual combination of fantasy, incoherence, and actually terrifying fanaticism coming from the president. One wonders why he took to the stage. Was he trying to avoid Passover Seder at the Kushner family? Because that's what was going on in most Jewish homes at that time last night. Israel is looking at this. First of all, the public is, a month into running to the shelters, running to the safe rooms, still mobilized, supportive of this war. The numbers have dropped a little. But if you look at the leadership position, then what Trump is saying, I think, very neatly accords with where Netanyahu wants this to be. It doesn't mean that Israel is pleased with all of the outcomes. Israel, I think, expected there to be less resilience, less capacity for Iran to strike. Israel expected that by pulling America into this war, not suggesting there's no American agency, but you wouldn't have had this war without Israel's urging, that by pulling America in, more could have been achieved. But Israel is trying to collapse as much of the state as possible, hoping the state will implode. This isn't some easy regime change. The Israelis never believed that. The Israelis saw an opportunity with Trump, with the hollowing out of the American system, of the interagency process, of checks and balances, of America using its own intel, that filtering through the system. Israel understood at a certain point that the small information bubble around the American president gave Israel tremendous opportunity to feed in its own lines, and it still has America still talking about 2 to 3 more weeks. We've heard that for a few weeks now. Still talking about 2 to 3 more weeks to do more destruction, using that kind of Israeli language. Not that Trump needs Israel to write horrendous scripts, I don't want to suggest that, but this talk of Stone Age, we've heard it before from the Israelis in relation to Lebanon, in relation to Gaza. So I think that as far as Israel is concerned, as long as American bombs, American money, American troops are doing as much of the work as possible, this is okay.
Gordon, you heard Daniel say there that the normal interagency process in the US isn't happening. But what probably is happening is that Israel won't have been surprised by what was in that speech. In fact, they might have even had some say of what was included and, perhaps more importantly, what was not. Would you agree?
I would certainly agree with Daniel about the hollowing out of the U.S. interagency process and the unfortunate purge of expertise on the Middle East, on Iran, on other regions of the world as well. I'm not sure that the Israeli government would have had much input into the speech. I don't think there are any. I didn't hear anything that made me think Trump didn't believe it or was reading from some script provided by others. What we didn't hear, or at least what I didn't hear, was any reiteration of what Trump's strategic objectives are for this war. And I certainly didn't hear any plans going forward, any indication what he intends to do, vague promises of it's going to be over in 2 to 3 weeks. But as Daniel just pointed out, we've heard that for several weeks now. So I don't think anyone's putting credence into those remarks.
Yossi, update us on what the opinion polls are saying. We heard in our report at the beginning of the programme that Israel was strongly behind this war at the start of it just over a month ago, and that is going down a little now.
Yeah, and it's expected the longer the war goes on, the more people will start asking questions. But specifically on the issue of Iran, there is quite a consensus in Israel. I think this is not new. War with Iran is something that has been discussed more than 2 decades. And all this time, talking about Iran, not just any other threat, but existential threat, combination of developing nuclear capability, ballistic missiles, and supporting of proxies. So at certain point, I think the Israeli public always expected that a war with Iran would happen. It happens first in June. There was support, but it was relatively short. Now the issue for the government, again, because not only the pomp that comes from the Trump administration, also the Netanyahu, talking always in terms of absolutes. It's absolute victory. It's regime change. It's obliterating the entire capability, and this doesn't happen. And we heard it back in June that the capabilities, the ballistic missiles and the nuclear being obliterated, and still people are running now more than 30 days, 34 days to shelter and safe rooms, including in one of the major Jewish festivals of Passover. So it's a different atmosphere. But I think for now, there is still support. Again, Netanyahu is not looking for a consensus from everyone. He has it within, when it comes to Iran, within the political system. No one really challenges him within other parties in Israel. It consolidates the base. He looks for the right time when it's convenient, together with Trump, to end the war. One has general election, the other has midterm election, and then the war probably would stop. And we see from whether Trump already said there was regime change, though we know this never happened. Netanyahu says, they will never be able to threaten us the same that they could only a few weeks ago. So you see the preparation, also understanding public opinion, especially in a country that relies so heavily on reserves, is not going to prevail forever.
Daniel, as all of you have said, there wasn't anything hugely new in the Trump speech, but there was perhaps, importantly, this new timeline you've mentioned of 2 to 3 weeks, which begs the question, what are they going to do in these 2 to 3 weeks? And I thought it was interesting, just a few days ago, there was a report in the Israeli press suggesting the Israeli military has almost completed bombing all the targets it had on its list.
Well, what we are probably increasingly seeing is and sometimes this is based on the AI technology that's being used in this. We heard that was apparently something to do with the bombing of the school in Iran. We heard during Israel's assault on Gaza that the lavender technology created an easier target base with ensuring masses of civilian casualties. So what you're increasingly seeing is a looser definition of what constitutes a regime target. Israel has, of course, been crucial, not only in starting this war, but in carrying America up the escalatory ladder. So going for energy reserves, something President Trump now frequently threatens, but also universities, Iran's industrial base, the steel factory. So I think what you'll see is more and more targeting of what has to be considered civilian infrastructure, the kinds of things that Trump has warned, which would constitute, and I think we probably already crossed that line, war crimes.
Okay, but Daniel, you mentioned war crimes there. So do you think if Israel was allowed to, it would repeat, and maybe it's doing this in Lebanon at the same time as well, repeat the Gaza pattern?
Well, I want to be cautious with that because Israel has a certain positionality, an eradicationist one, regarding the Palestinians and a certain capacity. And I don't think either of those necessarily apply. I think we will see and we already have seen things that are unjustifiable in legal terms. And I would draw the other connecting tissue, which is the impunity that Israel experienced in its war against the Palestinians in Gaza, emboldened it to then pursue pulling America into this war. But I actually want to suggest something else, if I may, James, which I think there is a coherent strategy that Israel has going into this and that it is still adhering to. By the way, I think Iran has a coherent strategy. I think where there is incoherence and incompetence is in the US side, is the president, and therefore by default, the Israeli strategy becomes the driving strategy. And the Israeli strategy is, how do we use this moment when we can pull America in, this moment of geopolitical fluidity, to assert maximum Israeli hard power hegemony, domination in the region? We talk about the Greater Israel Project, but people, I think, are overly fixated on one dimension, which is the territorial dimension, taking Palestinian land, taking Lebanese land, maintaining a security zone now in Syria. There's another dimension to this, which is how far Israel can project its power and create relationships of dependency. And crucial in that is that the attacks on the Gulf were entirely predictable, not justified, but predictable. And there was something that Israel anticipated by design would be part of this. And I think Israel wants to intentionally create Gulf vulnerability and weakness to pull the Gulf into more of a relationship of dependency on Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister has said the answer to Hormuz and the Red Sea is pipelines through to Israel's Mediterranean ports, and that's just one example. And so Israel hopes the longer America stays in this, the more you get this twin effect, both of weakening Iran and of, as Israel hopefully sees it, creating these other dependencies on it.
Gordon, in terms of the stated goals of this war, and I think most people could agree it's been all over the place. We've had a shifting number of goals over the last month or so. One that's been there from the beginning is getting rid of Iran's missile capability. In the Trump speech, he says their missiles are just about used up or beaten. Do you think Israel will be happy with where things are with regard to their missiles, given that Israelis are still under attack on a regular basis?
Well, I think that the Israeli government is certainly going to be pleased that the Iranian ballistic missile capability has been degraded. But as you point out, as long as the Iranians continue to attack Israel with missiles, as long as there continue to be air raids that drive Israeli people into shelters for safety, the Israeli population writ large is going to view things differently. And I suspect that is one of the reasons the poll that you cited indicates that support for the war and among the Israeli public is slipping. I think at the same time, though, it's also important to recall that, or bear in mind that while the Iranian ballistic missile capabilities have been degraded, they haven't been eliminated, but also their drone supply seems to be ample, and they continue to attack targets in the Gulf and continue to in effect, block shipping through the Strait of Hormuz through their use of drone warfare. Now, those drones are going to be a lot more difficult to eradicate than long-range missiles.
Yossi, I mean, the drums of war had been sounding for very many years, and most of that originally was about Iran's nuclear program. Earlier in the war, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio had said of the remaining highly enriched uranium that we know is in Iran, people are going to have to go and get it. Trump in his speech seems to have dropped that idea, although we're told he was presented with plans to send troops to go and get it. And in fact, before the speech, he told the Reuters news agency, "That's so far underground, I don't care about that." Do you think Israel still cares about that nuclear material? Or perhaps does Netanyahu think that, well, that's something that we can retain for the future as an excuse to come back?
I think Netanyahu would like to achieve as much of the targets he set at the beginning of the war as quickly as possible, because in a way he sees this as an opportune moment. Having Trump in the White House, relatively, at least at the beginning of the war, he was strong. It's not the case. It's not only approval rates in Israel going down, it's definitely in the United States, and it started in very low support in the war. So I don't think he would like to wait for another round, because, and definitely after the midterm election, if it goes against the Republicans there, you might think that there is no second or third, in this case, a chance. I think Israel is concerned. I think most countries would be concerned about the enriched uranium, in which potentially can bring Iran closer to nuclear military capability. But I think it's the way how you deal with that. The idea of sending troops actually to try and dig it out of the ground and take it out, whisk it away from Iran, it's a very dangerous operation. Not so sure there is a viable plan for this. And if there is, it can end being costly. The other option is really to keep bombing it and make sure that it's so deep in the ground that and with surveillance equipment, be able to keep looking and ensuring that it's never dug out of the ground, which seems gradually, as the war might come to an end in a matter of few weeks without troops on the ground, that this will be the preferred option.
Daniel, let me read you another quote from the Trump speech. "We never said regime change," he said. Yet, you'll remember on February the 28th, when he launched the war, wearing that baseball cap in Mar-a-Lago, he called on the people of Iran to rise up, which implied that that would mean a regime change. And Prime Minister Netanyahu had said pretty similar things. Will Israel be disappointed by how Trump now describes this? Well, there's been a change of regime because different people are in charge in Iran, so a change of guard, but clearly not really a change of regime.
Look, we want regime change. We haven't pushed for regime change. The regime has changed. This delightful new definition of regime change that we've been treated to. Israel, I don't think, ever bought the fantasy that the Shah's son or the MEK or someone else was going to waltz in. And Israel also didn't want the central Iranian state to hold together under a different, probably fragile leadership. Israel has been about trying to implode the state as much as possible. That's why, if people remember, there was this talk that Israel was promoting, of Kurdish fighters from the outside coming and seizing a part of Iranian territory to start dismantling the state. So, you know what? I think they pay as much attention to the public flip-flopping of the American president as the rest of us do. We scratch our heads. In the meantime, America is still bombing. And the question I think Israel is asking more is, on this home front, the fact that Iran has been able to still send missiles, the fact that the rate of Israeli interceptors is being depleted, the fact that Israel's chief of staff has turned round and said, we could collapse in on ourselves as a military because of the stretch on reservists, the fact that there's a tone beginning to enter the narrative around Lebanon as well, of are we going back into the quagmire? Is this the beginnings of Israel's push for hegemony bumping up against overreach, in addition to the loss of popularity in the US? So I don't want to overstate this, But I think that is part of the post-mortem that will be conducted on this when it ends, because it's unlikely to end with a definitive result. And Israel was hoping for a more definitive result.
Is that how they're going to see it in Israel, though, Gordon, given that the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, now are probably more powerful?
I doubt that's the way it's seen in Israel, because I think Israeli intelligence is more likely to be speaking truth to power. And I don't think there's been the same kind of purge of the Israeli intelligence community that we've seen in the United States. It's one thing to say there's been regime change. It's another thing to actually see regime change. The same regime is in power. It begs the definition of regime change when Ali Khamenei's son has at least ostensibly succeeded him, when, as you pointed out, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not only still in power, but arguably even more in power.
Okay. If I may, Gordon, very quickly bring Yossi in at the end. When we talk about regime change, I mean, it's not quite the same thing, because it will be an election at the end of the year in Israel. But politically, very quickly, do you think this could spell problems for Netanyahu?
I think so. I think it's not only this. You look at the last 3.5 years since the sixth Netanyahu government came to power. They were the most disastrous in Israel history, in every level that you can think. The most divisive in Israel history. You start with the attack on the very foundation of democracy. You go to October 7. That's the most deadly, or the deadliest day in Israel history. 2.5 years of war. Israel is more isolated internationally, and now is still involved in multi-front war. I think there is not much good news that Netanyahu can go to the public. It won't stop him, and he will try, of course, to spin it as the big defender of Israel. But reality is, Israel is involved deep in two wars that it can't really lead to the achievement that he wants. Regime change in Iran hasn't happened yet. In Lebanon, there is, again, as Daniel said earlier, there is more chance of actually sinking in the quagmire in Lebanon, which is nothing new about that. It was 82 and 2006, and years of occupation of part of Lebanon. Because the main issue, Israel has military capabilities, and its army is strong and capable and innovative. What it doesn't have is diplomacy to match it and to translate it into any diplomatic achievement. And that's why it's always end in another stalemate.
Thank you very much, Yossi Mekelberg, Daniel Levy and Gordon Gray. For the latest from across the region, stay tuned to Al Jazeera and check out our website for more detailed analysis, aljazeera.com. Post your comments on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or find us on X, where our username is @AJ Inside Story. That's it from me, James Bays, and the team here for now. Al Jazeera's extensive coverage continues in just a moment.